Hi, this is Dana Ward's channel on YouTube. This is my TikToks, and this is terrifying, tragic accidents that shouldn't happen to you. I hope you like it. Yeah, I would like to get to 1,000 subscribers, maybe more. Yeah, I want to get, I want to eventually go to America and around the world with my family and stuff. So yeah, I would like to eventually get paid for all this, etc. Anyway, hope you like and subscribe, guys. And the ones that haven't subscribed, please do, because you're missing out if you don't. Hey, I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. Yeah. Peace.
Accidents from past that are still unsolved. On February 2, 1959, 9 skilled hikers in Russia's Ural Mountains faced a terrifying and unexplained fate. Their tents were slashed open from the inside. Some bodies were found half-dressed in freezing temperatures, others had severe injuries, and traces of radiation were discovered on their clothing. The Dyatlov Pass incident has fueled decades of theories, but no definitive answers. On March 8, 2014, Malaysian flight MH370 vanished with 239 people on board while traveling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The transponder went silent. The aircraft veered far off its planned route and then disappeared over the Indian Ocean. Despite years of searching, only a few pieces of debris have ever been found. The main wreckage and the truth about what happened remain a mystery.
That's what gives me the fear of flying.
Accidents from past that
This is the scene of one of the most harrowing diving accidents in recent memory, where beneath the tranquil waters of Point Pied, Trinidad, maintenance crews work on an oil line that snakes across the sea floor, a high-pressure job that not only seals pipelines, but also fates. This is the story of the Paria diving incident. Welcome to a series that I'm calling Scientifically Interesting Ways to Die. On February 25th of 2022, in the warm waters off the coast of Trinidad, 5 commercial divers are carrying out what should be a routine job on an underwater oil pipeline near a port facility. The team includes Christopher Boudrum, Kazim Jr., Yusuf Henry, Fazal Kurban, and Rishi Nagazar, all experienced divers. Their task was to make repairs at Berth 6, an underwater riser pipeline used by the Paria Fuel Trading Company. To do this, the divers were working in a hyperbaric chamber, an underwater habitat maintained under pressure to provide a dry working environment. As part of the repair, the crews must remove an inflatable plug inside the pipeline, inserted into the pipe to seal it and prevent remaining hydrocarbons from escaping out into the environment. Around 3 p.m, GoPro footage captures Kazim Jr. as he collects a wrench required for the removal of the plug and hands it to Chris Boudrum, who hands it off to another member of the repair team. As Kazim Jr. begins to lift himself out of the water and onto the platform, his team begins to loosen the inflatable plug. But unbeknownst to them, the pipeline beyond the plug is essentially a vacuum. It has been drained of oil weeks earlier, leaving an empty space where temperature changes, trapped air, or the weight of the ocean itself had caused dangerously low pressures between the pipeline and the platform. This scenario is known as delta P, or differential pressure, where the pressure difference can generate thousands of pounds of force in an instant. The moment the plug loosened, the chamber was cast into chaos. Seawater explodes into the chamber, filling it and creating a vortex down into the pipeline, sweeping the team with it. Inside the pipe, the ocean rushes in with an estimated 7 tons of force. For 95 seconds, the divers are thrown about like ragdolls as they barrel through the metal walls of the pipeline. Just as their bodies begin to convulse as the oxygen in their lungs gives out, they skid to a stop. And slowly, the horror of their new reality sets in. They are entombed within a claustrophobic 30-inch diameter metal pipeline, 16 meters below the ocean's surface. Their eyes burn from the oil residue that still coats the interior of the pipe, and each breath stings their lungs from the remaining fumes. Despite the pain, adrenaline kicks in. They must find a way out. But the divers don't know exactly how far they've been pulled or which direction they are now facing. One end of this pipeline leads back to the subsea habitat where where they came from. The other way leads to Berth 5, an onshore refinery which has been firmly sealed due to the repairs. After some debate, they make their best guess at a direction and start to drag their battered bodies through the pipeline. The going is slow and tough. Slipping against the pipe residue and injured by the trauma, several of the men can only move for moments at a time before exhaustion sets in and they need to rest. They also start to notice another problem. The water level in the pipeline is slowly starting to rise as they head into a downward section of the line. They continue onward on their backs until Chris Boodram has only 6 inches of air remaining between his nose and the top of the pipeline. It is around this time that Chris comes across a second oxygen tank, but also a realization that they can't continue like this. Chris, still able to move forward, suggests that he will take one of the 2 oxygen tanks and push on to find help, leaving the other 4 men behind in the darkness to rest in a small air pocket in the pipeline. As the water fills the pipeline entirely, he flips over onto his front, pushing the tank ahead of him and starts to swim, not knowing if he's headed towards safety or deeper into trouble. Slowly, he starts to notice that it becomes harder and harder to draw air from the tank. His oxygen supply is running out, and he takes what he believes to be his final breath from the tank. And just as he thinks his fate is sealed, he collides with a second air tank. Driving the tank into his mouth, he gasps for oxygen. He frantically pushes on. Minutes slowly pass, each more agonizing than the last, until finally he breaks through the surface of the water into a secondary air pocket, this time halfway filled with water. As Chris moves through the air pocket, he comes across a third oxygen tank, and as he does so, he hears a noise behind him, and from the water emerges Faisal with the remaining oxygen tank. Faisal urges Chris to pause and rest, but Chris refuses, saying they've already been in the pipeline too long already. As Chris pushes on ahead, Faisal pauses to rest, promising to follow behind him. Now carrying his 2 oxygen tanks with him, it is only a short swim further of 10 to 20 meters before Chris again collides with something, this time the upward bend of the pipeline. He has made it to one of the berths. Unsure if he's at berth 5 or 6, he knows that he is now moments away from discovering potential escape or certain death. As he heads up the vertical section of the pipe, he doesn't find the inflatable plug that would have otherwise been in place sealing berth 5. He has found the dive chamber. The crews on the dive barge haul him aboard, battered, covered in oil and coughing up water, but alive. He immediately tells the others that the 4 other men are still down there, alive as far as he knows, and pleads with them to mount a rescue immediately, because with every passing minute, the available oxygen remaining in the pipeline dwindles. First, a short dive attempt is made to the bottom of the elbow, where the air tank Chris dropped is retrieved. And some accounts also tell of divers knocking on the outside of the pipeline at various points and hearing knocks back from the trapped men inside. But shockingly, it is at this critical moment in the rescue effort that it is halted. The officials in charge of Paria Fuel Trading, the company that operates the pipeline, decided it is too dangerous to send in rescue divers, as there is no commercial dive equipment available on site. Around 8 p.m, bangs are heard on the pipeline near berth 5. Hearing of the accident, families of the divers now wait in the refinery car park, desperate for further news. At 2:30 a.m, now on Saturday, bangs are again heard at the riser of the pipe of berth 5. Hope remains firm that maybe the 4 divers found a stable air pocket and could survive for many further hours. Divers on standby are reportedly itching and ready to go, some even willing to take the risk and dive without official approval. But the command holds firm. No divers are allowed back in the pipeline, but equally, no alternative rescue attempts are being made. Finally, after hours of anguished waiting, a fateful plan is formed. The Paria Fuel Trading Company authorizes the removal of the berth 5 blind flange, the seal at the mainland end of the pipeline. However, in the 13 hours that Kazim Al Jr., Yusuf Henry, Fazl Kurban and Rishi Nagazar have spent at the bottom of the pipeline, their bodies have now adjusted to the increased pressure of the environment, estimated to be somewhere between 2 and 3 atmospheres of pressure. This pressure is also what is holding the water in place and supporting the last remaining air pockets within the pipeline. At around 6 a.m, teams are ordered to remove the berth 5 flange, and just a split second, the pressure in the pipeline drops from 2 atmospheres to 1. Immediately, the water level in the berth 6 riser is seen to drop by about 11 meters, as the water rushes to redistribute through the pipeline, forcing out remaining air pockets and flooding it entirely. In this moment, the 4 trapped men's fates are sealed. Either they succumb to the effects of rapid decompression as gas bubbles form in their blood supply, or alternatively as the air pockets collapse, They simply drowned. We don't know what happened in between, but it wasn't until 6 p.m. that night, 12 hours later, that the families were notified that efforts had moved from rescue to retrieval. On Monday, 28th of February 2022 at around 6 p.m, the bodies of Kazim Al Jr., Yusuf Henry and Faisal Kurban were retrieved from the pipeline. The fourth diver, Rishi Nagazar, was retrieved a few days later, in the early hours of Thursday, the 3rd of March. The later autopsies revealed that all trapped men had survived at least until Saturday morning, with one potentially surviving until Monday. Devastated by this outcome, an official commission of inquiry was convened in 2022 to investigate the incident. In late 2023, the findings it delivered were damning. The commission reported that Paria had no proper rescue plan in place for such an emergency, and that it had not made any real attempt at rescue. During the inquiry, Paria officials had stated that they had no legal responsibility to rescue the men once the accident had occurred, fearing exposing themselves and the company to greater liability. The commission condemned Paria's actions and inaction as amounting to gross negligence, possibly criminal.
How would you rate the management of this incident on that day?
Excellent.
Thank you very much. 4 men died on an incident that you were to manage, and you consider that excellent.
This stance, prioritizing liability concerns over the urgent life-saving efforts required, outraged many. In September of 2024, charges were filed against the managers of the Paria Trading Company and Land and Marine Contracting Services, the company contracted by Paria to repair the pipeline. But just last week, in June of 2025, the Privy Council presiding over this case heard arguments that could determine whether anyone is ever held legally accountable. The statute of limitations for this case, the maximum time period after an event during which legal proceedings can be initiated, is 6 months. The criminal cases brought by Trinidad's Occupational Safety Agency fall outside the 6-month window following the 2023 Commission report. So this criminal case may be thrown out entirely on a technicality. As of last week, the Council has reserved judgment on this matter. In the end, the tragedy of the Paria diving incident serves as a stark reminder of what happens when the laws of physics meet human error, valor, and cowardice. Just as Mother Nature abhors a vacuum, we must abhor those who hold profits over people. This is the
13 people lost their lives during one of the worst freak accidents. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick, please make sure you follow this page, as this is my new main page. I will also link my backup account down below. It was June 29th, 2003 in Chicago, Illinois. Specifically at an apartment building on the north side. That night there was a large party going on, and that party took up basically the 2nd and 3rd floor of this apartment building. And at the time, all of these apartments had balconies on the outside. The very top balcony on the 3rd floor, well, there were a bunch of people on it when all of a sudden they started to hear the sound of creaking wood, and then suddenly it collapsed. When that top balcony collapsed, it then crashed into the 2nd balcony, and then that balcony collapsed. And then a balcony below it collapsed, and they fell into the basement, I guess. Amongst all 3 of the balconies that would eventually collapse, there were over 100 people total on all of them. So you had 100 or so people basically collapsing and crushing on top of one another. A massive amount of these people were then stuck underneath each other on the stairwell of the basement. They weren't able to breathe, they were suffocating, they were being crushed. It was such a clustered nightmare that the first responders that arrived had to use chainsaws to cut, pieces of wood away. There was a nurse who was one of the victims who basically turned into like a triage nurse. It was utter chaos. In the end, 57 people were hospitalized with serious injuries, and 13 people died. 11 of them being pronounced dead at the scene, 2 of them dying later at the hospital, due to various different things: crushing injuries, suffocation, some of them were punctured. What the investigation would uncover was that on that top balcony, there were over 50 people on it. There were reports that 2 of those people were jumping around on it. The balcony is only able to handle about 30-ish people. So the cause of the incident initially was overcrowding. Then they discovered in paperwork that the way these balconies were constructed was also very, very bad. They were constructed 1 foot longer than they should have been, and they were 81 square feet larger than they were approved to do. But somehow they were still approved by the inspectors. They would end up tearing down the rest of the balconies. But there were numerous lawsuits. The city even filed 2 lawsuits against 2 of the victims, the ones who were claiming to be bouncing around. I don't know the details, unfortunately, of all the money that was paid out, but I imagine it was a lot of financial damage.
It is almost midnight at San Francisco International Airport as Air Canada Flight 759 is approaching. Just one more easy landing and the pilots can call it a day. What they are not aware of is that the airport looks quite a bit different than usual. They are cleared to land on runway 28 right, located next to 28 left. However, due to maintenance, the runway 28 left is closed that night, and the lights had been turned off. But as the pilots who both have landed at this airport before were expecting to see 2 parallel runways, they make a mistake. Thinking that the center runway is 28 left, they confuse the taxiway on the right to be runway 28 right. On that very taxiway, 4 other flights are lined up for departure. United 1, a Boeing 787, Philippine Airlines 115, an Airbus 340, and 2 more United flights. In total, over 1,000 passengers, and the Air Canada flight is heading straight towards them all. The information about the runway closure was listed in the so-called NOTAM. These are notices to airmen which summarize any exceptional details regarding the flight. But these lists are quite long, typically several pages. And it's not easy to pick out the details that are actually relevant for the flight. The flight crew missed the runway closure. The pilots had been cleared for a so-called visual approach. This means that they can line up with the runway manually, steering the aircraft according to what they see. Considering the clear weather conditions, the visual approach is the normal procedure. But as landings on false runways or even taxiways have occurred before, careful pilots usually back up their approach with instrument guidance. In this case, they could have used the Instrument Landing System, ILS for short, of runway 28 right, to confirm that they really were on the right path. In order to activate this system, a frequency corresponding to that runway has to be dialed into the navigation receiver. Modern flight management computers usually do this automatically, but in this case, it had to be dialed in manually, and for some reason, the first officer didn't do that. The cockpit crew has had a long day. Coming from Toronto, Canada, their inner clock is already at 3 past midnight, and overconfidence and fatigue have been attributed to these mistakes. Canadian pilot fatigue rules were less stringent than US regulations, and the flight's captain had no significant rest period for the last 19 hours. As no one recognized that the airplane is lined up for the taxiway, Air Canada heads closer and closer to disaster. The ideal flight path for the visual approach at this airport comes in at a slight angle from the right. This was done in order to have incoming planes stay further away from the west shore of the bay, reducing noise pollution. Therefore, it is not unusual that from the tower perspective, airplanes appear a little offset to the left of the runway centerline. Air Canada further closes in on the runway, about to crash into the parked planes. And as they notice that something seems off, they reassure themselves.
And Tower, just want to confirm this Air Canada 759, we see some lights on the runway there. Across the runway, can you confirm a clear land?
At this moment, the tower voice recording shows that it took the tower controller about 5 seconds to answer the call.
Air Canada 759, confirm clear to land runway 28 right. There is no one on 28 right, flight you.
There was only one controller managing the traffic at this time. Normally, an additional ground controller is responsible for handling the ground traffic, but during the less busy night hours, the tower controller often works both frequencies. The pilots of United Flight 1, waiting as first in line on taxiway Charlie, were listening in on this exchange with Air Canada. They probably were wondering why Air Canada was still so far to the left of the center line. When it became obvious to them that the plane was heading for the taxiway, they spoke up quickly, not even mentioning their own call sign in order to save any second.
Where's this guy going? He's on the taxiway. Air Canada go around.
In the go around, AirCanada 759.
What we just witnessed could have been the largest accident in general aviation that ever happened. Air Canada 759 missed the tail fins of the waiting aircraft only by a few meters.
That looks like you were lined up for Charlie there. Fly heading 280, climb maintain 3000.
It is almost midnight.
Here we go. Oh, this is a major car crash, guys. Oh no, man. This is gonna be, oh my god. Major crash. click. No car crash.
Imagine falling in an elevator from something as high as the top of this building. This is another worst freak accidents. Viewer discretion is advised. The story occurred at the Val Reefs North Gold Mine, which is located in South Africa. Operating in this mine shaft was something similar to this type of train. The one in this story was a 12-ton locomotive, and it's supposed to operate down paths kind of like this. But on May 10th, 1995, at approximately 8:30 p.m., that train entered a tunnel more like this. It took a wrong turn. It crashed through a safety barrier, and it just basically went crazy from here. The train, now wildly out of control, falls down into the number 2 mine shaft. Unfortunately, at this exact same time, 104 miners got onto the elevator on the 62nd level, and it was beginning to ascend. The train, it continued to plummet down this mine shaft where the elevator was going up. It then crashed into the top of the elevator with 104 people on it. At this point, the elevator was at a roughly 1,500 to 1,600 feet up, and the safety mechanism, which was like a hook bar, was completely destroyed once the train hit it, causing the elevator to then collapse at a high speed at 1,500 feet. To give you some perspective here, it is somewhere around like the height of the top of this building all the way to the bottom. Once the elevator made contact with the ground, the 104 men aboard it were killed instantly. But for at least a few moments, they were living in an absolute nightmare, pure hell, as that elevator collapsed. They said that the bodies essentially just exploded. There were body parts just everywhere, and they still never have found all of the body parts. They said there was like skin just like caked all over the walls. Most of the victims, you couldn't even tell who any of them actually were at this point because they were just crushed. They said that the elevator basically had been crushed into a small tin box. I think in the end they were able to recover 56 bodies completely, but the rest was they were just so badly mangled in so many pieces that it was so difficult to, and they would hold a mass funeral for 45 of those victims. I know in the end the mining company or the shareholders ended up compensating the victims' families, and it doesn't sound like the driver of the locomotive, who did not die, he actually managed to jump out of the locomotive before it actually fell. Doesn't sound like he was held responsible because other safety precautions completely failed. This is like one of the worst ones I've ever heard about, ever. Imagine This is Worst Deaths Imaginable number 34, and spoiler alert, viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here behind me was 35-year-old Jill Greninger, and she was employed at Economy Locker Storage Company in Muncie Township, Pennsylvania, which I guess is part of the specialty food storage industry. Inside the factory, they do have some industrial meat grinders. If you've seen enough of those how do they do it, cooking shows, you've probably seen how these things operate. The meat grinder involved in this story, I don't know what style it was, but a lot of the pictures I pull up have this type of bladed system inside of theirs. On April 22nd, 2019, Jill Greninger was inside the storage facility, hard at work. And the circumstances that happened next, no one is truly sure about. There weren't any cameras that saw it happen, and there were no human witnesses to see it happen either. But Jill, while she was on top of a rolling ladder above one of these meat grinders, they speculate that she either had a piece of clothing get caught in the blades, or she simply tripped and fell. Regardless of how it happened, she fell into the meat grinder. She would fall head first into a bladed system like this. Another employee inside the building heard some horrific, mechanical noises coming from this particular meat grinder, loud enough that they were able to hear it from across the factory. So the coworker went over and noticed that Jill had fallen inside. Now, because she fell in head first, this is very similar to the wood chipper worst deaths imaginable I told a few weeks ago. The odds are the coroner believes that she would have died, hopefully instantly. I even hate to use the word hopefully because I hoped she wouldn't have fallen in, and I hoped she would not have died. But if she's gonna go out that way, at least, hopefully, it was quick. From what I understand, the head portion of her body was pretty much gone. Now, OSHA would investigate this, and they found 11 serious violations in that factory. By the way, this is not the exact factory, I just pulled a stock photo. Because of those 11 violations, this company was fined to the exact sum of $49,062. This story was relatively recent, but I can't find anywhere that might mention whether or not her family might have sued. But if that was all done quietly behind closed doors, then we wouldn't really know. But man, rest in peace, Jill. This is worst deaths imaginable. A man would drown to death upside down in one of the worst deaths imaginable. Viewer discretion is...
These are shocking cases of people who entered restricted roller coaster areas, and the last one is devastating. Number 1, James A. Young, 2015. At Cedar Point in Ohio, the 45-year-old lost his phone on the Raptor ride. Ignoring safety rules, he crossed 2 restricted fences to retrieve it. Seconds later, the coaster struck him at full speed, killing him instantly. Number 2, Asia Lee Ferguson, 2008. At Six Flags Over Georgia, the 17-year-old ignored warning signs and scaled 2 fences to get his hat back. As soon as he stepped onto the Batman coaster track, the train came rushing through, ending his life on the spot. Before I show you the last one, if you like, subscribe and comment God.
Did you know that 5 men died in just 0.04 of a second from their own bodies exploding? On November 5th, 1983, the Byford Dolphin oil rig was conducting routine deep-sea welding operations 300 feet below the North Sea surface. 5 divers were working in a pressurized diving bell system, breathing compressed air to survive the crushing depths. Then disaster struck. A diving bell was accidentally disconnected from the main chamber. In 0.04 of a second, the pressure difference literally tore the men apart. Their blood instantly vaporized. Their bodies exploded from the inside out as nitrogen bubbles expanded in their bloodstream. 1 diver's remains were scattered across 30 feet of rig structure. The cleanup took days as crews collected human tissue from every surface. The forensic report described bodies that had been turned inside out by the explosive decompression. It remains the worst decompression accident in offshore drilling history. The incident completely changed saturation diving safety protocols worldwide. 0.04 of a second changed everything. Did you know that
Photos taken before disaster, Part 2. This photo taken last month shows 7-year-old Arthur Bittencourt giving a thumbs up while playing in a pile of poisonous limestone powder in Brazil. Just minutes later, Arthur was tragically fighting for his life after accidentally inhaling particles of the toxic substance. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead on arrival. In 2022, Ukrainian woman Irina Filkina had her photo taken after getting a manicure for Valentine's Day. A few weeks later, she was killed by a tank while pushing her bicycle in the town of Bucha, and her body was identified by her manicure. This was the chilling moment when a laser pointer was shown on Elijah Clayton during a Madden tournament at a Florida mall in 2018. The shooter had lost a game and refused to shake his opponent's hand before leaving the tournament. He later returned with a handgun and fired into the crowd before turning the gun on himself. He killed 2 people, including Clayton, and injured 10 more. Photos taken.
This was not supposed to happen.
This could have been extremely deadly. This video posted to TikTok occurred back in 2019 in Barcelona, Spain. In this video here, this cruise liner that has a capacity of roughly 2,200 people and weighs almost 1 million pounds ended up crashing into a crane in Barcelona, Spain. With the weight and momentum of this cruise ship that weighs over 1 million pounds, it easily knocked over this crane, but fortunately no one was inside. The ship then quickly backs out, but unfortunately a fire has been started on this side of the screen. This just goes to show that cruise ships are not as safe as many people think they are. According to certain statistics, almost 200 people per year end up dying on cruise ships. Now, this is not to say that this is extremely dangerous. There's a lot of cruises that go out every single year, but this is something to be mindful of. This video in particular just goes to show the raw power and strength of a cruise ship and the damage that it can create. I'm gonna be honest.
A man who survived his last execution will be the guinea pig for a new controversial execution method. An Alabama man was originally hired as a hitman by a church pastor to kill his wife back in 1988. For just $1,000, Kenneth Smith agreed to carry the hit out. For that, he was sentenced to death in 1989, but the attempt at ending his life didn't take place until 2022, and he survived that attempt of lethal injection. He spent 4 hours strapped to a gurney as he was jabbed repeatedly with a needle while officials struggled to find a vein. Which might sound strange until you realize most of the time the executioner is a volunteer prison officer who's given $300 for their role. But now, 14 months later, he's going back on the gurney as the first person to be tested with a new execution method, one by nitrogen gas, which causes oxygen deprivation. However, this method has never been tested on humans, and many are calling this a science experiment. Others are saying it's ridiculous he's even on death row because 35 years ago, the original jury voted 11-1 to give him a life sentence before the judge overruled it and declared the death sentence. A man who survived
796 dead babies were found in a septic tank in Ireland.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know, the number's freaking
796?
Yes, bro. 3 years old was the oldest.
Damn.
It was like a Catholic home for children and unwed mothers, right? They found it underneath the house in the septic tank, and the original number is actually 798. But the reason I said 796 is because for some reason they only buried 2 children.
But the rest were...
But all 796, all of them, were just thrown into the septic tank. And the weirdest part about it is the people there, they all called it the pit.
What?
Yeah, and you just throw these babies in the septic tank and leave them there. How long they've been doing this dates all the way back to like the 60s.
Whoa.
People say even before that. Some people say the 20s. Investigators out there in Ireland till this day do not know what was the reason why they were doing this and how they even went about this. They still, to this day, right now, they're still trying to figure it out. So they ended up discovering all 798 of these dead kids, but they believe that it's still way more. And they haven't even, like, basically, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But can I tell you what my theory is, bro? I think these women were sacrificing these kids. That's just my opinion. Because, like, if this went all the way back to the 20s, bro, this was around the time that people were believing some crazy stuff.
That is true.
So I'm just saying, we had a lot of more belief in demonic forces and all these other crazy things and whatever the case.
So you think it's like some cult?
I think it's some cult shit. And why would they call it the pit?
That's true.
That's such a weird thing to call it.
True.
We throw them in the pit because 796?
Dude, that's insane, man.
796
An 11-year-old boy has died after a grooming TikTok trend went wrong. Tommy Lee Billington's heartbroken family say he was found unresponsive at a friend's house on Saturday. His grandmother claims he died instantly from a cardiac arrest while attempting the grooming TikTok trend, which involves inhaling toxic fumes such as from a spray deodorant or a paint can. It can cause a loss of consciousness, potentially fatal asphyxiation and heart attacks. Tommy's family have appealed to children and teenagers never to try this trend and say TikTok should be banned for all under 16s. An 11-year-old boy has died after a grooming TikTok trend went wrong. Tommy Lee Billington's heartbroken family say he was found unresponsive at a friend's house on Saturday.
When this man with Down syndrome wanted to go on this thrill ride at the amusement park, he quickly managed to take off his seatbelt and he stood up in the middle of the ride. 2 minutes earlier, the 28-year-old had entered the ride along with a group of people, all with intellectual disabilities. And although the ride operator had seen that these people needed special attention and ensured that all seatbelts were fastened, he didn't physically check each one of them. So the ride took off normally, and soon the man managed to forcefully remove his belt and stand up while the ride was still in motion. At that moment, his caretakers noticed what was happening and screamed for the operator to stop the ride, and he ran over to do it. Right then, the man was thrown into the air, and everyone else on the ride realized he was about to fall back down on top of them. But just before that could happen, the operator hit the emergency stop button, and in the end, the park had to pay the man's family $100,000 because he unfortunately didn't survive. When this woman took her dog on a trail near a waterfall, the dog ended up slipping and falling, being carried down a 30-meter drop. When this man...
You stab, you stab, you stab. until he was dead.
He stabbed 9-year-old Connor Verkirk 6 times and killed him. When arrested, he voluntarily confessed to the police and asked the judge to give him the death penalty. His name was Jamarian Lawhorn, and he was only 12 years old. On that afternoon in May 2016, he wandered alone in the park. He was too scared to go home. Then, Jamarian randomly picked a child as his target. After the attack, he didn't run. He called 911 himself and quietly waited for the police to arrive. He knew he had done something terrible, but in that moment, he just wanted everything to end. Police later found out that this 12-year-old had been suffering from long-term ABUSE. His body was covered in bruises, and his weight was far below normal. Doctors confirmed he had signs of chronic malnutrition. At the same time, Jamarian had called the police 3 times before, asking for help. But every time, nothing came of it. What followed was even more pain. The harm came from his mother and stepfather. His public defender tried to plead insanity, but the judge denied it. In the end, the court found Jamarian guilty of first-degree murder. Since he was still a minor, the judge issued a blended sentence. He would be held in a juvenile facility until the age of 21. After that, he would face another hearing in adult court. What surprised many was that Connor's parents chose to forgive Jamarian after learning about his background. They also expressed hope that he could get the treatment and change he needed. Do you think the judge's decision was fair? Let's talk about it in the comments.
You stab, you stab, you stab, you stab, you stab until he was dead.
He stabbed.
We have a massive update on the people that were stuck upside down for over an hour. And this will make you never want to ride a ride ever again. So this took place during a middle school field trip in Portland, Oregon. And the full story behind this gets insane. Because not only are people saying that they're never going on a roller coaster again, but that the people that were stuck upside down for so long are going to have permanent effects. Because they were on so long, and even doctors have been saying that this is going to have a lot of issues. Because with too much blood to the brain, but now the people that were on the ride are finally talking about it. This guy just said that it was really scary. This guy said, still bleeping suffering from severe migraines due to being trapped upside down for 26 minutes at Oaks Park. Another person says, I was on this ride at Oaks Park with my little brother. He fainted and still has a migraine. We were forced to finish the ride, which was awful. But this guy, Stu, left the funniest comment I've ever seen. Oh, isn't Stu so funny? We have a massive...
What happened to this man is arguably one of the worst things that could ever happen to you. This is known as the 1,000-yard stare, and yes, all these photos are 100% real. These photos mainly occurring during World War I and II, but there is more recent examples, of course. Known as the 1,000-yard stare because of what their eyes are saying, you may also know this in forms of shell shock. Now, what actually causes this is seeing something very sudden and extremely traumatic, such as in the war, where you may see people dying right in front of you, or traumatic events that you wouldn't even be able to repeat. Essentially being in an emotional shock that puts your body into this state where you can barely function. You've probably heard stories back in the wars of shell shock victims and how they were treated so badly as well, because we didn't really know that much about mental health and what to actually do with these people. We'd never really seen anything like it before. Nowadays there's a lot more treatment for this, so people can get the help they need. It's still absolutely horrendous and can leave people in ways like this, causing many physical effects such as headache, confusion, dizziness, falling all over the place, stuttering of words, insomnia, extreme anxiety, and sometimes even paralysis. So if you ever see a video of someone like this, just imagine what they're going through. What happened to this man is
These are videos humans were never...
A 48-year-old woman stepped onto the escalator of a Montreal metro station just as she had done countless times before. It was routine, second nature, until it wasn't. As she ascended, the sharp metal teeth of the escalator snagged the end of her scarf. At first, it was just a gentle tug, so subtle she barely noticed. But then, the pull grew stronger. Before she could react, the scarf tightened around